Ah, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is that you are watching this video. Um, I decided to, write a quick story about the difference between how the left protests and how the right protests and how we could end this quick, fast, and in a hurry. So let me go ahead and bring this up, make sure I'm sharing it. Yes, I am sharing it. Okay, this one's called The Consequences of Chaos: How Accountability Would End Violent Protests by Sammy the Squirrel. America's streets have become a stage for chaos in recent years, with protests turning from peaceful expressions of dissent into violent outbursts of destruction. Too often, these violent acts, perpetrated largely by leftist protesters, goes unpunished. Liberal district attorneys in major cities refuse to press charges, releasing rioters back into the streets to continue their rampage. But what if the rules changed? What if these protesters faced real consequences, arrests, criminal charges, and sentences up to 20 plus years in prison for attacking federal officers or destroying property? The childish impulse to smash, burn, and assault might finally lose its allure when met with the hard reality of decades behind bars. The left's trail of destruction. The evidence of leftist violence is undeniable. In the summer of 2020, following George Floyd's overdose death, protests erupted nationwide. While many began peacefully, they quickly spiraled into anarchy in cities like Portland, Seattle, and Minneapolis. Leftist groups, often tied to Antifa, torched cars, looted businesses, and clashed with police. Portland saw over 100 consecutive nights of rioting. Federal buildings defaced, businesses shattered, and officers injured. Nationwide, the damage reached an estimated $2 billion, leaving behind graffiti scarred streets and trashed communities. Seattle's Chaz Chop Zone experiment, a supposed leftist utopia, descended into chaos marked by multiple shootings and a breakdown of order. In Los Angeles, recent protests against immigration raids saw agitators torch self-driving taxis and attack law enforcement, only to be released to strike again. These scenes stand in stark contrast to the stated ideals of social justice that these protesters claim to champion. Compare compare this to protests from the right. Conservative demonstrations like the Tea Party rallies of the early 2012s were orderly and or 2010s were orderly and peaceful. Participants often left venues cleaner than they found them. No burned out buildings, no looted stores, just dissent without destruction. Even protests against COVID lockdowns, while passionate, rarely match the left's level of violence or vandalism. The exception, the January 6th Capitol riot, was a rare and condemned deviation, not the norm. Clutch or catch catch and release, a double standard in justice. Why does the left's violence persist? A key reason is the catch and release policy favored by liberal district attorneys. In cities like Portland, DAs have explicitly refused to prosecute low level offenses like rioting or interfering with police, effectively excusing the chaos. In 2020, hundreds of Portland rioters had charges dropped, free to rejoin the fray. Los Angeles followed a similar pattern, releasing violent protesters without consequence, emboldening future attacks. The thinking behind this leniency seems rooted in politics. Many of these DAs, often backed by progressive donors like George Soros, view leftist protesters as noble warriors for social justice. The crimes of arson, assault, and vandalism are framed as understandable outbursts of righteous anger, not acts deserving of punishment. This selective mercy creates a system where violence is tolerated if it aligns with the right cause. Contrast this with the treatment of right-wing protesters. The legal system often responds with swift, heavy-handed justice. January 6 rioters, for instance, have faced years in prison for trespassing and disorderly conduct. Serious offenses? Yeah, maybe, but far less destructive than the widespread looting and arson of 2020. Some have even been charged with seditious conspiracy, a term rarely applied to leftist rioters despite the repeated assaults on federal property. This disparity fuels a perception of two justice systems, one lenient for the left, another punitive for the right. The power of consequences. Imagine a different approach. What if leftist protesters who attack federal officers or engage in violent riots were arrested, charged, and sentenced up to 20 plus years in prison? The impact could be transformative. Violence isn't an inherent trait of protest, it's a choice, and choices change when the stakes get real. Many of these protesters are young, driven by idealism or peer pressure, viewing their actions as a thrilling game of resistance. But the prospect of losing decades of freedom would shatter that illusion. A 20-year sentence for hurling a Molotov cocktail or assaulting an officer isn't a slap on the wrist, it's a life-altering consequence. Faced with that reality, the appeal of picking up a brick might fade fast. This isn't about silencing dissent. It's about drawing a line between protest and crime. Peaceful assembly is a right. Violence is not. Severe penalties could deter the reckless, forcing a reckoning among those who think destruction is a shortcut to change. The left's rioters would have to confront a hard truth. Actions have consequences, and the law doesn't bend for ideology. A call for equal accountability. The solution isn't to punish all protesters, only those who break the law. But the law must apply evenly. If you burn a building or attack an officer, the punishment should be the same whether you're waving a progressive flag or a conservative one. Until it is, the double standard will persist, eroding trust in justice and encouraging more chaos. It's time to end the era of catch and release. Violent protesters aren't revolutionaries, they're criminals. Treat them as such, with arrests and long prison terms, and watch the violence stop. Accountability isn't just punishment, it's the key to restoring order. Okay, that's my short little one. That one's only 8 minutes long, 9 minutes long. Yeah, I just threw that one together really quick. It's just all this, screaming about how all these protesters are just immediately released, and the way the mainstream media reports differently on the two. They only have the one day, the January 6th. They only have that one day to point back to claim MAGA was violent and conservatives were violent. Whereas we have basically daily footage of their protests turning violent daily. But yet they only have the one example from us. I mean, even on January 6th, there's video showing MAGA, picking up the papers that the Antifa people who dressed up as MAGA went in and just started throwing stuff around. MAGA went in, picked it all up, straightened it back out, the little brochures and stuff, squared them back up nicely, made sure they were right, put them back on the table, straightened up the table, and walked on. Even stayed within the velvet ropes, didn't go outside the velvet rope, touring the Capitol building. But yet many of those people were held for years in jail without a single charge being brought against them. And not one single January 6th person has been charged with seditious conspiracy. It's all been little minor things like trespassing. That's it. You sure it's a crime, yes, but ignorance of the law is no excuse. I'm not going to get into that. There's so much going on with that still. There's still so much more information that's going to come out about January 6th that I purposefully stayed away from it, and that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to purposefully stay away from it. So, until the next time, y'all, have a great and blessed day. Thank you to all my paid subscribers again. And y'all have a great and blessed weekend. Bye.